Good morning. So we're going to talk about economic indicators and measurements today. And one of the biggest economic indicators there is, or not necessarily biggest, but one of the most important ones is GDP, and that stands for Gross Domestic Product. And so let's dive a little bit into what even that means. So macro, meaning all of the economy, analyze the economy using national income accounting. Sorry, that line's not big enough. Which are statistical measures that track three things. They track income, spending, and output of a nation. Because those are three areas that if they are all heading in the same direction and that direction is in a positive direction, then the economy is obviously doing well. And then obviously the opposite of that would be, the economy is not doing well. So let's talk about gross domestic product here. This is the market value of all final goods and services produced within a nation in a given time. All right. So we're talking about final goods. We're not talking about the materials that you need to make those final goods. So we're talking about the shoes. We're not talking about the leathers and the lace that need to go with that, for example. All right. So far we have the national income accounting and we have gross domestic product. So let's talk about the business cycle. This is a series of periods of expanding and contracting economic activity. And if you can see, all right, we have expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. But in this model, there's a general upward trajectory. All right, now, the problem with this is we don't always know we're in a peak until we're right about here, because how would we know that we're not going to keep going like this, right, until we turn the corner? Same thing here. We don't necessarily know we're in the trough until we're right here, because how do we not know it's not going to keep continuing down? So that's why when we learn about fiscal and monetary policy in a couple weeks, you're going to see why it's a little bit tricky to regulate that. So during a period of expansion, there is economic growth. And that's going to be an increase in the nation's GDP. So let's look at what that means. That means that the market value of all final goods and services produced within a nation is positive, all right? Or it's trending up, which means that prices are going up, but that isn't always a bad thing, okay? But the value of all those final goods, usually it means that people are buying more. And if people are buying more, then businesses are going to be producing more. All right, I just talked to you about the peak. Let's talk about the period of contraction. There's three things that you need to know about a contraction. The first one is a contraction that lasts 2 or more quarters, and a quarter is 3 months, so this would be 6 months. Right? And this is a recession. And you don't know you're in a recession until you've gotten through the end of that 6 months, because let's say the GDP goes down the first 5 months, but then goes up the last month, it's not a recession. So that's why it's a little tricky to figure these things out. Now, an extended period of high unemployment and limited business activity is a depression. And although the period of time in 2008 and 2009 was called the Great Recession, it didn't reach the depths of the Great Depression that we had back in the 1930s. All right, and then the last thing is stagflation. And maybe you recognize this part and this part. So stag, like stagnant, like it's not moving, it's just kind of stuck there. And then inflation, like inflation or deflation. So this is when you have businesses not really increasing any of their productivity, activity, nothing, and you have an inflation of prices. And those two things, when they meet, it's not a good situation. We had a lot of that in the 1970s. All right. So the point at which GDP and unemployment stop declining is your trough. So this is when you're going to start to see an increase and to start to head back up in a generally positive direction. So that's back up here. All right, so let's talk about something that this might seem confusing. All right, aggregate, big word, SAT word, it just means all, okay? So we're talking about all of demand and all of supply. So the sum of all of the demand in economy, you guessed it, is going to be aggregate demand. All right, I just want you to challenge yourself, and I want you to, as soon as I'm done talking, pause it and see if you can draw me an aggregate demand curve. Just try. If you get it wrong, life goes on. Just try. So go ahead and pause. All right, welcome back. I hope that you said, well, I know that's a demand curve, but I wonder how to make it an aggregate demand curve. Well, guess what? All you do is this. Just label it aggregate demand, and that is all of the demand. Pretty tricky, huh? So now I know you know how to create an aggregate supply curve. So go ahead, I want you to draw an aggregate supply curve. Go ahead and pause. Welcome back. Did you do that? Aggregate supply, that's all that is. It's talking about all of the supply in the economy in a country in a given year. Now, if we put the two together, aggregate supply and aggregate demand, we know that that point when we were talking about individual or market supply and demand was equilibrium. But when we're talking about aggregate supply and aggregate demand, we have to talk about macro equilibrium. All right. So if we draw that, I want you to challenge yourself to go ahead and do that. So go ahead and pause. Welcome back. All right, so we have aggregate supply, we have aggregate demand, and then we have macro equilibrium, right? All right, you guys did a great job on this. All right, so now what you need to do is you need to go back to your binder checklist, and you need to put economic indicators on here. All right, so now after you're done, make sure that your notes are all set and ready to go. You are going to play a Quizlet game, and then you guys are going to play a Kahoot game if there is time at the end of the period. All right, nice job.